Hey guys, it's Mitch. How's it going? We're taking a look today at a comic I forgot I had. It's Warriors of Plasm #1 from Jim Shooter. So just before we get into it, if you enjoyed the channel, if you feel like you might want to help out a little bit, go subscribe to my Patreon. Links are in the description, gives you early access to everything I do, helps out the channel, helps to buy new comics. So I'm sure there's a bunch of people who remember what this is, there's a bunch who have no idea what this is, and there's a bunch more, probably, who just kind of vaguely remember, like, hey, that looks kind of familiar. Well, if you know who Jim Shooter is, you know he was the editor-in-chief at Marvel during probably their most successful time, other than, the early 60s. He spearheaded Marvel's expansion into toy lines, and he kind of started the whole business of crossovers. He eventually was ousted at Marvel as editor-in-chief, probably because he had a particularly prickly personality and had a specific way he liked to work, which didn't really jive with a lot of people, honestly. It's kind of hard to say he wasn't successful, so maybe in some ways he was correct, but when you're burning bridges and alienating everybody along the way, that doesn't exactly help your longevity. So after that, he founded Valiant with a bunch of other sponsors, after a very near miss by Marvel himself, and he built Valiant up to be what was essentially the #3 company in comics, depending on how you feel about Dark Horse. And Jim Shooter built Valiant up slowly and carefully, in a way that he felt that comics should be built up, which is story first, art last. You do small print runs so you don't find yourself reliant on large print runs, and then if shit runs dry, you're up shit creek. You build loyalty through reliability and through trying to make a meaningful relationship with your customers. In this case, that would be through the gold foil program, where readers could get a gold foil variant of a particular comic, usually a #1 or a #0, if they wrote in and told about how they had basically extol the virtues of Valiant in their community, how they had helped further the company. You did that to Valiant's satisfaction. Valiant mailed you a gold foil variant of a #1 or a #0, which you could hang on to, or you could flip, probably for a few hundred, maybe even a few grand eventually. Not to mention, of course, this was at the time when comics were starting to be looked at as some sort of investment. The baseball card market had crashed, and all of the investment weirdos from there were looking for something new to play with, and they decided comics were the thing because I believe a copy of Action Comics #1 went for a ridiculous amount of money, as it should. But then, of course, they correlated that to, well, then, all comic #1s should be worth a ridiculous amount of money, right? At least to some kind of degree. It's like, well, no, that's not how that works at all. But sure, go on and buy 50 copies of X-Force #1. I'm sure that'll benefit you in some way, somehow. And of course, Shooter thought this was all eventually going to be self-destructive, and comics was going to have a tough time surviving this. And I mean, Marvel bankruptcy was just around the corner in the mid-90s, so he wasn't wrong there. The problem, of course, is that Jim Shooter had investors. He had co-owners who had given him the money to build this enterprise, and now, when comics were making them more money than they had ever made, we're getting frozen out of future profits because the founding father basically had an old school idea about how the business should be run, or in their minds. Didn't want to go maximizing profits with a 7-figure print run. And of course, with co-owners and stockholders, you can't really do that where you're basically holding the company back. So they ousted Shooter. They got their 6- and 7-figure print runs. They made shit tons of money. And then the company was essentially dead by 1996. So in 1993, after having been maybe the biggest figure in comics in the mid-80s, and then being ousted, and then being one of the biggest figures in comics again in the early 90s and being ousted, Jim Shooter was looking to keep the trend going with a new company that I believe he owned the rights to, so he didn't have any other co-owners he had to deal with. He'd brought a few of the creators from Valiant with him, and they were going to try and start over again from scratch with the flagship title, Warriors of Plasm #1. And you might see here that the Warriors of actually isn't part of the logo. Not the same way, it doesn't have the same kind of treatment as the Plasm part, because Plasm was originally supposed to be the title. Marvel tried to sue for some sort of copyright infringement from a Marvel UK title called Plasmer, and Jim changed the title to Warriors of Plasm because of that. So let's get started on this. We'll start with the cover. It's a pretty good cover. It doesn't help, though, that your characters all look kind of uninteresting. This is drawn by David Lapham, who was a guy who came to be known over at Valiant from drawing mostly Harbinger, I think, although he might have also drawn, I want to say Rye, maybe not. And of course would later go on to draw Stray Bullets. I already did a video on Stray Bullets #1. And this is sort of an in-between time for David Lapham, when he's been in the business for a year or two, and he's built up his skills, he's worked out all the kinks, but he hasn't really developed into any kind of superstar. He hasn't developed any kind of really recognizable style other than that his stuff is very solid. He's like an elevated house style guy, kind of like Dave Gibbons. I think I've said that before. Very likely at the behest of Jim Shooter, actually, considering Jim Shooter had no interest in having artists that had their own particular styles. Jim wanted no creator credits on books, which is a little funny considering this one has creator credits on the opening splash, but maybe he was just catering to the customers at that point. But yeah, this is a very well-drawn cover. Like, it's a nice composition with the framing here. All of our guys are well highlighted. All this stuff in the back, like all the bodies down here, they stand out well against. The only problem is that they don't look particularly interesting. They're just in these kind of nondescript uniforms, which I don't know how long that holds up, but that is how things go over the course of the issue. It also maybe doesn't help too much that the color is all painted. Like, it's not bad painted, although there's elements in here every once in a while that do remind me of that whatever kind of medium we can find to color kind of feeling that was always evident in Valiant books. But of course, this is in 93, and this is when Image is kind of pushing the envelope for how a comic is supposed to look in the 90s, which is, you know, it's supposed to be CG colored. So I'm not sure how well this competed in that regard. Oh yeah, so this is a thing I almost forgot about. So this is how Jim wanted to build up, because Jim was always looking for different kinds of gimmicks. For this one, he wanted the comic to be inextricably linked to a trading card set, to the point where the trading card set, once completed, would basically act as an issue number 0. I'm not sure how many trading cards were in the set. It's an interesting idea. That said, I mean, I never would have bought these trading cards. I don't know how many people would. Interesting thing, actually, I just went to look up how many copies of Warriors of Plasm number 1 were sold, and it looks like it's 750,000. Which is a number that you see often in 1993 sales. It's right around the same as like the Spawn issues that were coming out at that time, which is like 13, 14. The Fatal Attractions crossover and the X-Men books that was coming out. A lot of the Deathmate books, you know, it's a common number to see in 1993, just not from a Jim Shooter-led title. As I said at the start, Jim Shooter had the deal going with Valiant where he was trying to build it slow. Not so much with this, I'm guessing because he was the sole owner, or pretty close to, and needed a whole bunch of capital right away. So we're going to start things off with a big old splash. This is written by Jim Shooter, drawn by David Lapham, so both penciled and inked. Painted by Janet Jackson, James Brown, and Tom Zelicko, and lettered by George Roberts. So I don't recognize any of the support cast, but the main players, obviously. And we're going to start off with a big splash, which is not usual for a Jim Shooter kind of book. And our Robert Plant-looking protagonist here is Lorca, who's like a general, essentially, for the Org of Plasm. So the whole deal with Plasm is the planet that these guys are from. Everything on Plasm is bioengineered. Resources are grown. When things are killed or destroyed, they're recycled. And resources are used to build houses, ships, people, luxury goods, everything, essentially. And the way you keep things going on Plasm is you go out and you conquer worlds and you slaughter everything and feed it to Plasm. So yeah, nice opening splash page. Good shot of our guy. I don't like his hair. His hair is very poofy, but that's okay. We're going to go Eric Larson here with splash, double splash. Very impressive shot of just the wreckage of whatever planet they're conquering at this time. There's a nice depth to this. Like, there's a good separation of the elements in the foreground here. And then, the smoke kind of helps to stand everything out. And then the thin line work for all the Plasm soldiers. These are like Zoms or something. And then the stuff in the far background. Like, it's a very skilled drawing for a double page splash. Like, the look in this book is very good. It's very skilled. It's not necessarily what kids wanted to read in 1993. Like, they wanted the flashy stuff. But, I mean, there was really only the one company that had all the flashy stuff in 93. Everybody else all kind of had to make do. And we're not being helped out very much by the dialogue. The dialogue in this is going to be pretty old-fashioned, and it's going to be jargon-heavy, where we're getting a lot of terminology that's used in World to kind of add to a verisimilitude that, you kind of need with, it's a completely alien culture. They would have their own terms for everything, never mind the language barrier. But the problem is if you do a lot of that, the reader can't connect to what you're even talking about. So, like, they keep talking about, like, this is Gorelord Swiracine, who's being told that only scattered infidel snipers remain, and she tells their guy that they need more body barges to reap all the corpses. This is to feed to the Org of Plasm, And, like you're trying to keep up, but they keep throwing terminology at you. And eventually gets to a point where you just kind of phase out. But, okay, so this is Swersine. That seems to be the name. Again, not helpful. Who is the lustmate of Lorca. She's like the captain. He's the general. She gets all horny when she gets covered in blood. And she's like, do me in front of the soldiers. He's like, I can't, baby. I'm busy. So we're already creeped out about our protagonist, which is nice. Good artwork going forward. Some good-looking gore. And Lorca gets the ship. You have to convince the ship to do anything, apparently. You have to ask nicely. But he gets it to fly back to the org of Plasm, which dilates a pore. They're able to fly it. Like, everything is super organic. And they keep kind of hammering that home time after time. So that's not bad, though. I mean, that's a good concept. Some pretty cool visuals here as the ship is flying in to dock. And the color actually works in its favor, I'd say, in this case. I don't know that they would have been able to pull anything interesting off in terms of computer color at this time. At least not any more interesting than what's going on with the painted stuff. So when they get back, they mulch the ship, because apparently it makes more sense to mulch it and, then just regrow a new one when they need it, than to just tie up resources maintaining the ship in the meantime. So after his victory, Lorca is going to go and do like a tour through some of the more populated areas, and you get the feeling that all the citizens that he's seeing that are like, they're all, praising him and prostrating themselves before him. And it seems very like Last Days of Rome, where everything is extremely decadent, where everyone is just a slave to fashion. If there's a trend, they all latch onto it immediately. Guy here says horns are in now. He got his grafted on yesterday. It's not a good thing when you got to tell people that the horns are in. But that's the deal. A new trend starts in some sort of body modification. Everybody gets in on it. So he makes his way through the public, gets back up to his chambers where Swersine ordered a bunch of pleasure zoms. So there's pleasure zoms and trample zoms. So whatever a zom is, it's not quite a clone because clones do come up later in the comic. I imagine these are a bit more brainless than that. So he makes his way through the forest of pleasure zoms and finally gets to his room where he can relax. And we learn, if we've still been paying attention and care at this point, that Lorca hates the system he's in. He hates the planet. He hates the society he's a part of. This is the thing. I kind of remember bits and pieces of this. I had this back in the day. I don't remember him kind of working against the society. So it seems the main thing that's driving Lorca to hate Plasm Society is that his previous mate, Legion, was killed by another one of the figures that we're going to meet eventually in this. And she was some sort of anti-establishment, sort of an individualist, so the kind of person that really didn't have any place in Plasm Society. So Lorca builds a clone of her. We're reminded at this point that clones are illegal. And he downloads her consciousness into it. And he's going to tell her about his new plans. You get the feeling he does this every once in a while when he's feeling sad or lonely, where he just, kind of, it's not the same as having the person. It's more like having an interactive photo. But he can get a little bit of the feeling of if Lagan was still around and he could tell her about, this grand endeavor that he's going to go on now. So a big part of Lorca's job is finding new planets to go and conquer. So he's found the planet Earth, where everyone is an individual. Every single person. And his plan is to capture a whole bunch of them, subject them to genetic reengineering, and use them as an overthrowing force, and then eventually as like a new breeding stock. So that's exactly what he does. He captures 10,000 humans and teleports them all with these like cockroach-looking things that just kind of turn into, like a big like explosion of bubblegum and suck up the people and teleport them back. It's an interesting sequence and thankfully pretty quick, but something goes wrong in the process and they all start dying. So something has gone wrong with the math. Something doesn't quite match up between the humans and whatever the plasm technology is. You'll notice we're not talking much about the art anymore. It feels like it was just those first 3 pages that were maybe like a concession Jim was giving to David Lapham. Like, okay, fine, you can have these first 3 pages to make the comic look good. After that, though, you draw boring and you act like you like it. I'm not giving you anything more interesting to draw over the rest of the issue. So while all the humans are dying off, he gets a call from a Grand Inquisitor saying that there's been a huge spike in power usage, like resource usage, which is kind of a no-no on Plasm. And now Lorca's going to have to answer for that. So when he looks back in the chamber, it turns out that there are still 5 survivors. There's a coincidence. But 5 surviving humans isn't really going to help Lorca in any way. Like 10,000 is an army, 10,000 he can take down the ruling class. 5 theoretically shouldn't do anything. So he's just going to have the trample zombs go down and wipe them out. and then maybe try again at some point in the future once he's kind of gotten off of the Grand Inquisitor's radar again. And he has to go and meet with the Grand Inquisitor. In the meantime, he has Legion, well, the Legion clone, because remember, she's a clone. He's going to have her mulched because she's not actually Legion. And I imagine since clones are illegal, he can't exactly keep her around anyway. All right, so from there, we're going to cut to the recovery sack. That's nice and gross, where we've got our surviving humans. And this is where I feel like the book completely loses me, because none of these people talk like people. So these guys wake up in this vat. I mean, they have been a part of this huge, like mosh pit of 10,000 dying people that are just swimming in goo. And like the first thing the woman here says is, "Where are my clothes? What happened to my clothes?" And it's like, dude, you were just surrounded by fucking corpses. And then the guy here who thinks he's the leader goes, "Calm down. Let's start with things we know. Who are you people?" And everyone gives everybody else their first and last name and what normal-ass American city they're from. And then this goop starts growing over them, and that turns into their very perfunctory uniforms. And right when they get their uniforms, that's when the Trample-Zoms show up to wipe them all out. And we're going to cut back to the Grand Inquisitor. So just a quick page to get us acquainted with who I assume will eventually be the point of the comic. Like, this is a super team. So far, not impressed. Like I said, nobody speaks like a human. Nobody seems any kind of likable, really. In fact, what we're going to see over the course of this is that it doesn't feel like Jim Shooter's trying to build up people who will work together. He's trying to build a group that will have conflicts. And I mean, yeah, conflicts creates storytelling options a lot of the time, but it also can create unlikable teams that people just stop buying. Okay, so anyway, with the Grand Inquisitor here, Grand Inquisitor has gathered several thousand criminals, basically. Well, it seems like petty criminals at that. But this is some kind of punitive measure because Lorca used up all sorts of energy transporting all the humans here and trying to turn them into superheroes. So all these criminals are going to get mulched and turned into resources because of Lorca's selfish act. And this little kid here is like, "So how come you get like a gigantic slug tail, which eats up a whole bunch of resources, and then you're going to go and lecture us?" And the reason, of course, is that he's from the elite ruling class. Like I said, it's all very reminiscent of like Last Days of Rome. Anyway, the Grand Inquisitor here, Ulnaria, I think. This is another thing. Not even forgettable names, just like names that are impossible to remember. I feel like Jim Shooter got a little lost in his own lore. But he's trying to find out from Lorca here why he needed all that energy. Lorca's like, I was doing my job. He's not going to tell him anything. The captain here, his lust mate, Swaracine, comes to defend him. And the Grand Inquisitor says, "Okay, if you're loyal here, take my bug gun," which is like it is. It's a gun that's a bug that kind of fastens itself to your arm. It's a pretty cool looking thing. But yeah, if you're so loyal, shoot your lust mate here. And she's like, "Fuck yeah, shoot me." Like she's that kind of pervert. And he pulls the trigger because she doesn't actually mean anything to him. This is a keeping up appearances thing. But the gun doesn't fire because I guess he says it's hungry. But he still pulled the trigger, which is all that should matter for the Grand Inquisitor. The Grand Inquisitor, of course, isn't fully convinced. He assumed he wouldn't pull it. And this is we'll see next time when I have some other test for you. And it's like, well, you better hurry up. This comic's only lasting for 13 issues. So anyway, back to the humans who are trying to escape from the Trample-Zoms. We're finally going to get some more interesting visuals, I think. Well, here and there. This sequence is all about telling us what the humans can do, like what their powers are. So we get the one girl here who's telepathic, but she has no idea what telepathy is at first. And she's just kind of muddling through it. And then we've got the guy here who's in the Marine Reserves, who's very gung-ho and thinks he's the leader. And turns out he's got some kind of super speed. We've got the big guy here who seems like a bit of a pussy, but he's developed super strength. And everybody is commenting on these new abilities that they all have and like slowly fumbling through them. And the problem at this point is that we've kind of already seen this with Harbinger, where people are like, "Wow, I'm an everyday person with like no previous knowledge of things like telepathy. Let me describe every aspect of what I'm experiencing here." And it was cool in Harbinger because that was in a new kind of context where they were trying to make it a bit more realistic. But, I mean, they're doing it again now, and it's not particularly interesting anymore. And, I mean, part of it is, like, this nameless chick ain't no Sting, So, yeah, anyway, the big guy smashes the head off one of the Trample-Zoms. Trample-Zom gets up and starts regrowing its head. Very cool, gross shot. of the head coming back together. But they're able to wipe out the trample zombies before more reinforcements show up, and they try to run away before they can get caught. And I think they steal a couple of more of the bug guns. They keep getting herded further into the tunnels, and Lorca sends this giant fucking mutant thing after them. Kind of cool looking, except for the goofy eyes, unfortunately. Like, looks like an alien that had goofy eyes grafted on top. But again, we're getting some cool visuals with, like, explosions going off here with the thing just kind of chasing after them, and it's just like fucking limbs flying all over the place. It's good stuff. Grandma here gets shot in the back, but turns out she's Grandma Tank. She's, like, invincible now. And she helps the dude with the super strength here to bust through the wall, just ahead of the big thing with the googly eyes chasing after them. And that's when the last guy here, the minister, sucks up all the light in the room and I guess shoots the monster with it. It's a cool shot. Like, there's a few cool shots in this sequence. So that's all right. I mean, if you stick around with the comic long enough, you get rewarded with a couple of cool shots. So they wipe out the alien-looking thing, which impresses Lorca, but, you know, that's not his concern right now. He has to find a way to wipe them out still. And they keep going. They find the big pit where all the bodies have been stashed from when they first arrived. And they figure since this is where they first showed up, maybe this is the way out as well. I guess there's logic there. And they're just, like, yelling at each other all over the place here because they're all distraught. And it's, okay, that's great. I don't like these people yet. They don't start creating conflicts right away. And Lorca is moving on their position with more trample zombies, but the telepath is able to convince one of the trample zombies that's in here. She's able to take over its brain and make it teleport them back to Earth. And that's kind of where we end the issue. It's a little bit unclear exactly what happened, but I think that gets clarified in issue 2. And then we get, like a word from Jim Shooter where he's just going to hype up this new thing he's doing. And then a bit of ads for the other titles that are in the starting lineup for Defiant Comics. So The Good Guys and Dark Dominion. I can't imagine too many people in 1993 wanting to read a comic called The Good Guys, unless it's being ironic. Anyway, I believe that the idea then was that those the superheroes get teleported back to Earth, and they have to try and build a defense against this invading alien race that they now know is coming, theoretically. So, I mean, that's a good place to start a book, I think. The problem is that the delivery was, like, problematic and awkward. There isn't a whole lot of cool in this issue, and in 1993, cool is all that matters. And it would become kind of a moot point anyway, because the thing I said at the beginning, where Marvel was suing Defiant Comics for the use of the Plasm title, like, eventually Marvel would be defeated in that lawsuit, and that Jim Shooter would retain ownership of Plasm, and they would, decide that it wasn't copyright infringement. But Marvel would also tie them up in legal proceedings for like 13 months for that lawsuit, and all of the legal fees basically sucked up all of Jim Shooter's capital that he was intending to use to grow his new company. So that just kind of shoved his company under. So Marvel wins. But it's an interesting book to take a look at, actually, because, the art's very skilled. It doesn't have a lot of interesting things to draw all the time, but that's the nature of a Jim Shooter comic book. The concept is I would say, quite good. The dialogue bad, and the characters unlikable. So, it's kind of a mixed bag. If it can figure out where it's going from here, it might turn into a pretty decent comic. I don't remember ever hearing that it did, though. So yeah, anyway, like I said, moot point, Defiant Comics is defunct after another year or so. Jim Shooter would try a few more times to come up with like a new comic or a new company, but this was his last big attempt, I think. Since this, it kind of feels like Jim's decided, or maybe even realized, that comics doesn't really like him that much, like the industry. He's got a lot of good ideas. He's got a lot of the right ideas. He was vehemently against getting out of the newsstand in the mid-90s because he was saying, if we're not in the newsstand, then we're not picking up casual readers. And casual readers are the lifeblood of comics. And the people running the big two at the time were going, yeah, but direct sales is guaranteed money. That's the money we want. And it's like, okay, but you are bleeding yourself by 1,000 cuts by doing that. And now, of course, what's going on? It's very rare to find comic fans under the age of 40. Because everybody younger than that has never seen comics in the wild. They've never seen them in a grocery store or a gas station or at a pharmacy. They've had to know that there's such a thing as a comic book store, and they've had to bug their parents to take them to it. Which, is not going to happen regularly. Not very often. So Jim Shooter was right on that one. I'm not sure how much satisfaction he gets out of it, but that's kind of how it goes. Comics was not made to make anybody happy. And that's the uplifting note we'll end this one on. Thanks very much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like, hit subscribe, hit the notifications so you know when the next one's coming out. Go over and subscribe on my Patreon. It gives you early access to everything I do, from the Blood Force stuff to the YouTube videos before they get uploaded to YouTube, as well as some Patreon exclusive content. You can also follow me on Instagram and DM me there for commissions, and you can join the Blood Force Discord server. But yeah, that's going to do it. Thanks again for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.